Hey everyone, welcome back to Sleepover with History. I'm Thomas and I'll be your guide for tonight's journey into the bizarre world of medieval bedtime routines. Tonight, we're exploring one of history's most uncomfortable truths: why people in the Middle Ages chose to sleep sitting upright, propped against walls, headboards and each other, rather than lying flat like civilized human beings. You might think this sounds ridiculous. After all, what kind of person voluntarily chooses to sleep like they're waiting for a delayed flight in a medieval airport terminal? But here's the thing, they had their reasons, twisted, terrifying, and absolutely fascinating reasons that will make you grateful for your modern mattress and the simple luxury of sleeping horizontally. From fears of suffocation to beliefs about digestion, from social status to pure survival instinct, medieval sleep was a complex dance between superstition, medical theory, and the very real threat of not waking up at all. So dim the lights, maybe turn on that fan for some soft background noise, and prepare to discover why our ancestors spent their nights in what can only be described as the world's most uncomfortable meditation pose. Trust me, after tonight, you'll never take lying down to sleep for granted again. Let's begin our journey into the upright world of medieval slumber. Picture this. It's 1347. You're a well-to-do merchant in London, and it's time for bed. But instead of flopping down on your mattress like a modern human being, you're carefully arranging pillows against the headboard, positioning yourself at a precise 45-degree angle, and settling in for 8 hours of what can only be described as the world's least comfortable nap. Your wife does the same, your children follow suit, even your servants, sleeping on their straw pallets, prop themselves up against the wall. The entire household looks like they're permanently waiting for a medieval dentist appointment. This wasn't laziness. This wasn't some bizarre fashion trend. This was survival. You see, in medieval times, lying flat to sleep wasn't just uncomfortable, it was considered potentially fatal. And before you roll your eyes and mutter something about those silly medieval people, remember that these were folks who built cathedrals that still stand today, navigated by the stars, and performed surgery with nothing but wine and prayer. They weren't stupid, they were terrified. Let's start with the most immediate fear: suffocation. In the medieval mind, lying flat was essentially asking death to come have a chat. The logic went something like this: when you lie down, all your bodily humors, blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile, shift around like a poorly packed suitcase. Your lungs, already working overtime in an era before air purifiers, could become flooded with these mysterious fluids. Medieval physicians, armed with medical knowledge that was part Roman wisdom, part Arabic translation, and part "I saw this in a dream once," were absolutely convinced that horizontal sleep was a recipe for disaster. They believed that when you lay flat, your vital organs would compress against each other like passengers in a medieval subway car during rush hour. But here's where it gets really interesting. They weren't entirely wrong about some things. Medieval homes were poorly ventilated, often filled with smoke from cooking fires, and packed with people, animals, and various forms of organic matter that would make a modern health inspector faint. Carbon dioxide levels could genuinely build up, and lying flat in a stuffy room with poor air circulation could indeed make breathing more difficult. The medieval solution: sleep sitting up, keep your airways clear, let gravity work in your favor, and if you start to suffocate in your sleep, at least you'll be in a position to do something about it before you become a statistic in the village death records. Now, let's talk about the four humors, because medieval medicine was basically a 1000-year-long chemistry experiment conducted on unwilling human subjects. According to the medical wisdom inherited from ancient Greece and Rome, your body contained four essential fluids: blood, hot and wet; phlegm, cold and wet; yellow bile, hot and dry; and black bile, cold and dry. The theory went that these humors needed to stay perfectly balanced, like a medieval smoothie that could kill you if you added too much kale. When you slept lying down, these humors would supposedly settle and separate, like oil and water in a bottle left too long in the sun. Blood might pool in your lower extremities, phlegm could collect in your lungs, and bile, well, bile could end up anywhere. And that was never good news. Medieval physicians prescribed sleeping upright as a way to keep these humors properly mixed and circulating. Think of it as a human lava lamp approach to healthcare. Keep everything moving, keep everything balanced, and hopefully, you'll wake up in the morning with all your fluids where they belong. The consequences of humor imbalance were supposedly dire. Too much blood settling in your legs could cause fever and inflammation. Excess phlegm in your chest could lead to consumption, what we now call tuberculosis. Yellow bile accumulation might cause jaundice, and black bile buildup was thought to cause melancholy, madness, or death. So sleeping sitting up wasn't just about comfort, it was about maintaining the delicate chemical balance that kept you alive, sane, and reasonably pleasant to be around. If you thought the humor theory was complicated, wait until you hear about medieval digestive philosophy. According to the medical wisdom of the time, your stomach was essentially a medieval slow cooker that needed constant attention and proper positioning to function correctly. The prevailing theory was that digestion was a form of cooking that happened inside your body. Your stomach would cook food using natural heat, breaking it down into useful nutrients and waste products. But here's the catch. This cooking process was supposedly affected by gravity, body position, and the alignment of your internal organs. Medieval physicians believed that when you lay flat immediately after eating, your stomach would be unable to properly cook your food. The digestive fire would be smothered, undigested food would rot inside you, and toxic vapors would rise up to your brain, causing everything from nightmares, to madness, to spontaneous death. The solution: sleep sitting up for several hours after your evening meal. This would allow gravity to help your stomach properly process food, prevent dangerous vapors from rising to your head, and ensure that your digestive fire continued burning at the proper temperature throughout the night. Medieval dinner parties must have been exhausting affairs. Imagine eating your evening meal, then spending the next 4 hours sitting upright in bed, waiting for your stomach to finish its medieval cooking show before you could risk lying down. No wonder medieval people often looked so tired in their portraits. They were essentially running a 24-hour digestive surveillance operation. Here's where medieval sleep gets really interesting from a social perspective. Your sleeping position wasn't just about health, it was about status, morality, and your place in the great medieval hierarchy of human worth. The wealthy and noble didn't just sleep sitting up, they slept sitting up in style. Their beds were elaborate affairs with ornate headboards, carefully arranged pillows, and sometimes even special sleeping chairs designed specifically for upright slumber. These weren't just beds, they were throne-like structures that allowed the upper classes to sleep like royalty, even in their most vulnerable state. The truly wealthy might have had multiple pillows of different sizes, creating a complex support system that would make a modern chiropractor weep with envy. Silk cushions, down-filled supports, and even specially designed neck rests were all part of the medieval sleep aristocracy's arsenal. Meanwhile, the common folk made do with whatever they could find. Straw pallets propped against walls, rolled-up cloaks as makeshift pillows, and sometimes just leaning against each other for support. Families would often sleep in groups, creating human pyramids of mutual support that kept everyone upright and theoretically alive through the night. Servants and the very poor might sleep sitting up on the floor, backs against the wall, arms wrapped around their knees in a position that looked more like punishment than rest. But even this was considered preferable to the dangerous luxury of lying flat. The message was clear: your sleep position reflected your moral worth, your social status, and your commitment to staying alive. Lying down was for the lazy, the morally corrupt, and the soon-to-be dead. Medieval bed design was a fascinating exercise in engineering solutions to imaginary problems. Since everyone needed to sleep sitting up, furniture makers had to get creative about how to make this position bearable for 8 hours at a time. The most common solution was the high-backed bed. These weren't just headboards, they were essentially miniature walls with padding. Some reached nearly to the ceiling, creating a cozy alcove that provided back support while also offering privacy and protection from drafts. The headboard would be angled slightly backward, creating a natural reclining position that was steep enough to prevent humor pooling, but comfortable enough to actually allow sleep. Pillows were strategically placed at different heights to support the neck, lower back, and arms. The wealthy might have had as many as 6 or 7 pillows of varying sizes, creating a complex support system that would make modern ergonomic experts nod in approval.
Some beds featured built-in armrests on either side, allowing sleepers to rest their arms comfortably while maintaining the upright position. These armrests were often padded, and sometimes even heated with warming stones during cold nights. The truly innovative sleep setups included footrests positioned at just the right height, to prevent legs from going numb during the night. Some beds even had small shelves or niches built into the headboard where sleepers could keep water, prayers books, or chamber pots within easy reach. For the wealthy, bed curtains weren't just for privacy, they were essential for creating a warm, draft-free environment that made upright sleeping tolerable. These curtains formed a kind of sleep tent, trapping body heat, and creating a cozy microclimate that helped offset the discomfort of sleeping sitting up. Getting ready for bed in medieval times wasn't just about putting on night clothes, it was about preparing your body for a night of carefully orchestrated vertical rest. The process could take up to an hour, and involved more planning than a modern space mission. First, there was the timing. You couldn't just go to bed whenever you felt tired. Medieval physicians recommended waiting at least 3 hours after your last meal before attempting sleep, to allow proper digestion to occur. This meant that if you ate dinner at sunset, you might not be able to lie down, or rather sit down, until well after dark. The pre-sleep routine involved careful attention to your body's humor balance. Some people would take mild laxatives or diuretics to ensure that their bodily fluids were properly balanced before sleep. Others might drink specific herbal teas designed to promote healthy digestion and prevent harmful vapors from rising to the brain. Clothing was another crucial consideration. Medieval nightwear was designed to be loose and flowing, allowing for proper air circulation while maintaining the upright position. Tight clothing was believed to restrict the flow of humors, and could lead to dangerous accumulations of bodily fluids. The actual process of getting into bed required careful choreography. You couldn't just flop down, that would undo all the humor balancing work you'd done during the day. Instead, you had to carefully position your pillows, adjust your posture, and settle into the upright position with the precision of a yoga master. Family members would often help each other get positioned correctly, adjusting pillows and checking posture to ensure that everyone was properly aligned for a safe night's sleep. Parents would tuck their children into their upright positions, making sure that small bodies were properly supported and that airways remained clear. Of course, sleeping sitting up for 8 hours straight wasn't exactly a recipe for restful slumber. Medieval people faced a unique set of nighttime challenges that modern sleepers can barely imagine. The most common problem was simply staying upright. Without the deep muscle relaxation that comes with lying flat, medieval sleepers had to maintain some level of tension throughout the night to avoid slumping forward or sliding down into a dangerous horizontal position. This meant that true deep sleep was probably rare, and most people existed in a state of light dozing punctuated by frequent position adjustments. Circulation problems were another major issue. Sitting upright for hours could cause legs and feet to go numb, leading to painful pins and needles that would wake sleepers throughout the night. Some people dealt with this by periodically changing leg positions, or by using footrests to elevate their feet, but these solutions weren't always available or effective. Back pain was practically universal. Even with the best pillow support, maintaining an upright position for 8 hours put enormous strain on the spine. Medieval people probably woke up stiff and sore more often than not, though they would have attributed this to humor imbalances rather than poor ergonomics. The psychological effects were probably significant too. Sleeping sitting up meant you were always somewhat alert, always ready to respond to danger. This might have been useful in an era when home invasions, fires, and other emergencies were common, but it also meant that deep restorative sleep was elusive. Couples faced their own unique challenges. Sharing a bed while both trying to maintain upright positions required careful coordination and mutual support. Partners would often lean against each other, creating human buttresses that kept both people properly positioned throughout the night. Medieval Christianity added another layer of complexity to the already complicated world of upright sleep. The Church taught that sleeping positions had moral and spiritual implications, and naturally, lying flat was associated with sin, laziness, and spiritual weakness. The reasoning was typically medieval in its twisted logic. Lying down, was what animals did. Humans, being created in God's image, should sleep in a position that reflected their divine nature and their superiority over beasts. Sleeping sitting up was seen as a form of constant prayer, a way of maintaining a respectful posture before God even while unconscious. Monks and nuns were particularly strict about upright sleep. Many monastic rules specifically prohibited lying flat, except during illness, or as a form of penance. Some monasteries had special sleeping chambers with built-in seats or supports that made horizontal sleep impossible. The most devout Christians would often sleep with prayer books in their hands, rosaries around their necks, or religious medallions pressed against their chests. The idea was that even in sleep, the faithful should maintain their connection to God through proper posture and sacred objects. Some religious extremists took this even further, sleeping in chairs, or even standing up while leaning against walls. These practices were seen as particularly holy, though they probably resulted in more hallucinations than spiritual revelations. Prayer was also integrated into the sleep routine itself. Many families would recite specific prayers before settling into their upright positions, asking for protection from the dangers of sleep, and for guidance in maintaining proper posture throughout the night. Medieval physicians, bless their well-intentioned hearts, had turned upright sleep into a complex medical science that would make modern sleep specialists laugh and cry simultaneously. They had detailed theories about optimal sleeping angles, specific pillow arrangements for different body types, and elaborate diagnostic procedures for sleep-related disorders. The recommended sleeping angle varied depending on your age, sex, occupation, and current health status. Children were supposed to sleep at a steeper angle than adults, women at a different angle than men, and people with different occupations had different optimal positions based on their presumed humor balances. Physicians would sometimes make house calls specifically to evaluate patients' sleep setups. They would examine pillow arrangements, check bed angles, and make recommendations for improvements. Some doctors even specialized in sleep-related issues, becoming medieval sleep consultants who could command high fees for their expertise. The diagnostic process was elaborate and often invasive. Doctors would examine patients' urine, check their pulse at different times of night, and even observe their sleep positions to determine if they were maintaining proper upright posture. Patients who were caught sleeping in suboptimal positions might be prescribed special exercises, dietary changes, or even bloodletting to correct their humor imbalances. Treatment for sleep-related disorders was equally complex. Patients might be prescribed specific herbal remedies, given special pillows filled with particular materials, or required to sleep in specific positions based on their individual medical needs. The truly dedicated physicians would sometimes spend entire nights observing their patients' sleep patterns, taking notes on position changes, breathing patterns, and any signs of humor imbalance. These medieval sleep studies were probably more uncomfortable for everyone involved than they were helpful. The medieval sleep industry was a surprisingly robust economic sector. Specialized furniture makers, pillow manufacturers, and bed designers all catered to the growing demand for upright sleep solutions. The wealthy would pay premium prices for custom-designed sleep setups, while the poor made do with whatever they could afford or improvise. High-end bed makers developed increasingly sophisticated upright sleep systems. Some beds featured adjustable headboards that could be set to different angles, removable pillow systems that could be reconfigured based on individual needs, and even primitive mechanical systems that could help maintain proper positioning throughout the night. The pillow industry was particularly lucrative. Different pillows were designed for different body parts and sleeping positions. There were neck pillows, back pillows, arm pillows, and even special pillows designed to prevent dangerous side sleeping. The materials used varied widely, from expensive down and silk for the wealthy to straw and rags for the poor. Specialized sleep consultants could earn good livings advising clients on optimal sleep setups. These experts would visit homes, evaluate existing sleep arrangements, and make recommendations for improvements. Some even offered ongoing monitoring services, checking in regularly to ensure that clients were maintaining proper sleep hygiene. The market for sleep-related remedies was also substantial. Apothecaries sold special herbs and potions designed to promote healthy upright sleep, prevent nightmares, and maintain proper humor balance throughout the night. Some of these remedies were probably helpful, while others were likely just expensive placebos. Even the clothing industry got involved, designing special nightwear that would be comfortable for upright sleeping, while also maintaining the proper level of modesty and warmth required for medieval bedrooms. Perhaps nowhere was the absurdity of medieval sleep practices more evident than in how children were expected to adapt to upright sleeping. From the moment they outgrew their cradles, medieval children were trained to sleep sitting up, creating a generation of tiny insomniacs who probably never experienced truly restful sleep. The training process was gradual but relentless. Toddlers would be propped up with pillows and gradually weaned off lying flat. Parents would check on their children throughout the night, adjusting their positions and ensuring they hadn't slipped into dangerous horizontal positions. Special children's beds were designed to make upright sleeping easier for small bodies. These featured higher sides to prevent rolling, smaller pillows designed for tiny frames, and sometimes even restraints to keep particularly restless children in proper position. The poor children who couldn't maintain upright positions were often seen as sickly, lazy, or morally deficient. Parents would go to great lengths to correct their children's sleep positions, sometimes using uncomfortable devices or even mild punishments to encourage proper posture. Children's sleep schedules were also affected by the upright sleeping requirement. Since maintaining the position required more conscious effort, children often slept less deeply, and for shorter periods than modern children. This probably contributed to the generally smaller stature and shorter lifespans of medieval people. The psychological impact on children was probably significant. Growing up believing that lying flat to sleep was dangerous and immoral would have created deep-seated anxieties about rest and relaxation that persisted into adulthood. For the working classes and servants, upright sleep wasn't just uncomfortable, it was an additional burden in lives that were already difficult enough. Without access to quality beds, pillows, or private sleeping spaces, the poor had to improvise upright sleeping solutions that were often inadequate and sometimes dangerous. Many servants slept in groups, leaning against each other for support in positions that prioritized survival over comfort. These human sleeping arrangements created their own problems, as the movement of one person could wake the entire group, and illness could spread rapidly through close physical contact. The sleeping arrangements in medieval households were often cramped and uncomfortable. Servants might sleep in kitchens, hallways, or storage areas, using whatever they could find to prop themselves upright. Sacks of grain, rolled blankets, and even cooking pots were pressed into service as makeshift pillows and supports. Winter was particularly challenging for the poor. Without heated sleeping chambers or warm bedding, servants had to choose between maintaining proper upright posture and staying warm. Many probably suffered from cold-related illnesses that were exacerbated by poor sleep positions. The work schedules of medieval servants often conflicted with the time requirements of proper upright sleep. Those who had to wake early for cooking or other duties might not have had enough time to properly prepare for sleep or to get adequate rest in the upright position. Despite these challenges, servants were still expected to maintain proper sleep posture. Masters would sometimes check on their servants' sleeping arrangements, and those caught sleeping improperly might face punishment or dismissal. The irony was that the people who could least afford to be tired and unproductive, the working classes, were the ones who probably got the least restful sleep due to their inadequate upright sleeping arrangements.
Welcome back to part 2 of our medieval sleep saga. When we left off, entire populations were torturing themselves nightly in the name of staying alive, propped up like uncomfortable mannequins in a medieval furniture store. But change was coming, and it would arrive in the most unlikely form: rebellious sleepers who dared to lie down. The first cracks in the upright sleep empire began appearing in the late 14th century, not in the grand halls of medicine or the sacred chambers of the church, but in the practical bedrooms of people who were simply too exhausted to care about proper posture anymore. The Black Death had just swept through Europe, killing roughly 1/3 of the population and leaving survivors with a fundamentally changed perspective on life, death, and the relative importance of sleeping at uncomfortable angles.
When you've watched entire families die, despite following all the medical wisdom of the time, you start to question whether sleeping sitting up is really the key to survival. Some plague survivors began experimenting with slightly more reclined positions, not full horizontal, that would have been too radical, but angles that were closer to 30 degrees, instead of the traditional 45 to 60 degrees. These sleep rebels called themselves recliners, and they were about to accidentally start a revolution that would change human rest forever. The Renaissance brought more than just art and science. It brought a fundamental questioning of medieval assumptions about everything, including sleep. Renaissance humanists, with their emphasis on human comfort and individual experience, began to wonder if maybe, just maybe, the human body might have evolved to sleep in a position that was actually comfortable. The first scientific challenges to upright sleep came from an unexpected source: artists. Renaissance painters and sculptors, obsessed with human anatomy and natural body positions, began to notice that when people fell asleep naturally, during long model sessions or while posing for portraits, they invariably slumped into more horizontal positions. Leonardo da Vinci, that Renaissance overachiever, actually conducted secret sleep studies in his workshop. He would observe apprentices and models as they dozed off naturally, sketching their body positions and noting how they moved during sleep. His notebooks contain dozens of drawings of people sleeping in various positions, most of them far more horizontal than medieval medical wisdom would have approved. But Da Vinci kept these observations secret. Publishing them would have been professional suicide and possibly actual suicide, given the Church's position on proper Christian sleep posture. Instead, he hid his sleep studies among his other heretical anatomical drawings, where they remained undiscovered for centuries. The real breakthrough came from an unlikely source: Renaissance merchants. These practical business people, who traveled extensively throughout Europe and beyond, began to notice that people in different regions had different sleep customs. Turkish merchants slept on low divans, Middle Eastern traders used floor cushions, and even some northern European populations had begun experimenting with flatter sleeping surfaces. More importantly, these merchants noticed that people who slept in more horizontal positions didn't seem to die any more frequently than those who slept sitting up. In fact, they often seemed more energetic and productive during the day. For merchant classes who valued efficiency and profit above tradition, this was revolutionary information. The medieval medical establishment didn't take these challenges lying down, pun absolutely intended. As reports of horizontal sleep experiments spread, physicians and church authorities launched a coordinated campaign to defend traditional upright sleeping practices. New medical treatises were published with increasingly dire warnings about the dangers of flat sleep. Some physicians claimed that lying down would cause immediate death, while others predicted that horizontal sleepers would develop terrible diseases, go insane, or give birth to deformed children. The church got involved too, issuing proclamations that lying flat during sleep was not just medically dangerous but morally sinful. Some religious authorities claimed that horizontal sleep was a form of sloth, one of the 7 deadly sins, and that good Christians should sleep in positions that demonstrated their readiness to serve God at all times. The medical establishment even developed new diagnostic techniques to identify people who were secretly sleeping horizontally. Physicians would examine patients for signs of horizontal sleep syndrome, including excessive energy during the day, improved mood, and suspicious absence of the back pain that was considered normal and healthy. Some regions implemented sleep inspectors who would make surprise nighttime visits to ensure that citizens were maintaining proper upright sleep positions. These inspectors had the authority to fine, publicly shame, or even imprison people caught sleeping improperly. The wealthy classes, invested in their expensive upright sleep furniture and consultant fees, were particularly resistant to change. They had spent fortunes on elaborate sleeping systems and weren't about to abandon them without a fight. Despite the medical and religious establishment's best efforts, horizontal sleep continued to spread, driven primarily by economic factors that made upright sleeping increasingly impractical for growing segments of the population. The rise of urban centers created housing shortages that made elaborate upright sleep setups impossible for many people. In crowded city apartments, families couldn't afford the space required for proper upright sleeping arrangements. Multiple family members sleeping in single rooms needed to maximize space efficiency, and horizontal sleeping simply took up less room. The growing merchant class, focused on productivity and profit, began to notice that employees who slept horizontally were more alert, energetic, and productive during the day. Some progressive employers began encouraging their workers to experiment with flatter sleeping positions, leading to what historians now call the productivity revolution of the early Renaissance. The printing press played a crucial role in spreading horizontal sleep practices. As books became more affordable and literacy rates increased, people had access to information about sleep practices from other cultures and regions. Travel accounts describing comfortable horizontal sleep arrangements in foreign lands began to circulate widely. More importantly, the printing press enabled the spread of medical knowledge from classical sources that had been lost or suppressed during the medieval period. Ancient Greek and Roman texts describing horizontal sleep practices were translated and distributed, providing historical precedent for lying down during sleep. The economic argument for horizontal sleep became increasingly compelling. Simpler sleeping arrangements required less expensive furniture, fewer specialized pillows, and no ongoing consultant fees. For growing urban populations struggling with rising living costs, horizontal sleep offered significant savings. As resistance to change gradually weakened, European sleeping practices evolved toward what historians call semi-horizontal sleep, a compromise position that satisfied both traditionalists and reformers. Semi-horizontal sleep involved sleeping at angles between 15 and 30 degrees, significantly flatter than traditional upright positions, but not completely horizontal. This position was achieved using fewer pillows arranged in simpler configurations, making it more affordable and practical for average families. The medical establishment grudgingly accepted semi-horizontal sleep as a lesser evil, developing new theoretical frameworks to explain why this position might be safe. They argued that the slight elevation still prevented dangerous humor pooling while allowing for more comfortable rest. Religious authorities also eventually accepted semi-horizontal sleep, reinterpreting their theological positions to suggest that God cared more about the quality of rest than the specific angle of repose. Some progressive theologians even argued that comfortable sleep was a divine gift that should be enjoyed rather than endured. The furniture industry adapted quickly to changing demands, developing new bed designs that could accommodate semi-horizontal sleep while still maintaining some of the status symbols associated with traditional upright sleeping arrangements. This compromise period lasted for roughly 2 centuries, from about 1450 to 1650, during which European sleeping practices gradually flattened while maintaining connections to traditional upright sleep culture. The 17th century scientific revolution finally provided the evidence needed to debunk medieval sleep theories completely. Early scientists, armed with new tools and methodologies, began systematic studies of human sleep patterns and their health effects. William Harvey's discovery of blood circulation in 1628 demolished the medieval theory that lying flat would cause dangerous pooling of bodily fluids. Once physicians understood that blood naturally circulated throughout the body regardless of position, the primary medical argument for upright sleep disappeared. The development of the microscope allowed scientists to study human anatomy in unprecedented detail, revealing that the respiratory system functioned effectively in horizontal positions, and that the digestive system was not negatively affected by sleeping posture. New understanding of anatomy also revealed that the human spine was actually designed to support the body in horizontal positions during rest, and that sleeping upright put unnecessary strain on the skeletal and muscular systems. The emerging science of chemistry began to debunk the medieval theory of bodily humors entirely. As physicians learned about actual biochemical processes, they realized that the 4 humors were fictional constructs with no basis in human physiology. These scientific discoveries spread rapidly through Europe's growing network of universities and scholarly societies. Medical schools began teaching new theories of sleep and rest that emphasized comfort and natural body positions over arbitrary postural requirements. The Catholic Church, facing challenges from Protestant reformers and scientific discoveries, gradually abandoned its doctrinal positions on sleep posture. The Counter-Reformation emphasized spiritual reform over detailed regulation of daily activities like sleeping positions. The 18th century Enlightenment brought fundamental changes in how Europeans thought about human comfort, individual rights, and the relationship between tradition and progress. These philosophical shifts created the cultural conditions for the final adoption of horizontal sleep. Enlightenment philosophers argued that human beings had the right to seek comfort and happiness, including comfortable sleep. This represented a radical departure from medieval attitudes that viewed discomfort as spiritually beneficial and comfort as potentially sinful. The rise of individualism challenged collective adherence to traditional practices. People began to feel empowered to make personal choices about their daily lives, including how they slept, based on their own experiences rather than external authorities. The concept of progress became central to Enlightenment thinking. Traditions were no longer valuable, simply because they were old. They needed to be justified by their practical benefits. When evaluated by this standard, upright sleep practices were found wanting. The emerging middle class, with increasing disposable income and leisure time, began to prioritize comfort and convenience in their daily lives. Better sleep became seen as a mark of civilization and progress, rather than a sign of moral weakness. The Industrial Revolution created new economic pressures that made comfortable sleep practically necessary. Factory workers needed to be alert and productive during long shifts, and employers began to recognize that well-rested workers were more efficient and less likely to be injured. The transition to horizontal sleep required significant innovations in bed design and mattress technology. Medieval beds designed for upright sleeping were completely unsuitable for horizontal rest, necessitating a complete reimagining of sleep furniture. The first horizontal beds were simple affairs, wooden frames with rope or leather supports that could hold straw mattresses. These were far cry from the elaborate upright sleeping systems of the medieval period, but they represented a fundamental shift in sleeping philosophy. Mattress technology advanced rapidly as demand for comfortable horizontal sleep increased. Manufacturers experimented with different filling materials, from straw and feathers to early forms of cotton batting and horsehair padding. The development of bed springs in the 19th century revolutionized horizontal sleep comfort. These systems provided support while allowing for natural body movement during sleep, making horizontal positions far more comfortable than they had been on rigid medieval sleeping surfaces. Pillow design also evolved significantly. Instead of the complex arrangements of multiple pillows needed for upright sleep, horizontal sleepers typically used one or two pillows designed specifically for head and neck support in lying positions. The bedding industry emerged as a major economic sector, producing sheets, blankets, and coverlets designed specifically for horizontal sleep. These textiles were lighter and more flexible than the heavy coverings used in medieval upright sleeping arrangements. The cultural transformation, how sleep became private. One of the most significant changes accompanying the transition to horizontal sleep was the privatization of rest. Medieval upright sleeping had often been a communal activity, with families and household members sleeping together in shared spaces. Horizontal sleep encouraged the development of private sleeping arrangements that transformed family life and social relationships. The concept of the bedroom as a private space emerged during this period. Horizontal sleep required more space and privacy than upright sleeping, leading to architectural changes that created dedicated sleeping areas separate from other household activities. Marriage relationships were significantly affected by the transition to horizontal sleep. Couples who had previously slept sitting up, often supporting each other physically, now needed to negotiate shared horizontal sleeping spaces. This led to the development of new intimate sleeping arrangements, and eventually the concept of the double bed. Children's sleep became more independent as families adopted horizontal sleeping practices. Instead of sleeping in groups or being supported by adults, children learned to sleep alone in their own beds, contributing to the development of individual identity and autonomy. The privatization of sleep also had psychological effects. People began to experience sleep as a personal, private experience rather than a communal activity. This contributed to the development of individual dream interpretation, personal sleep rituals, and the concept of sleep as a time for personal reflection and rest.
The 19th century medical profession
faced the embarrassing task of admitting that they had been wrong about sleep for over 1,000 years. This professional reckoning led to significant changes in medical practice and the development of the modern science of sleep medicine. Progressive physicians began publishing studies documenting the health benefits of horizontal sleep. These studies showed that people who slept lying down had better cardiovascular health, fewer respiratory problems, and improved cognitive function compared to those who maintained upright sleeping positions. The medical establishment gradually developed new theories of sleep that emphasized the importance of rest and recovery rather than maintaining arbitrary body positions. These theories recognized sleep as an essential biological function that required comfort and relaxation to be effective. Sleep became a legitimate area of medical specialization as physicians began to study sleep disorders and their treatments. This marked the beginning of modern sleep medicine, which would eventually develop into a major medical specialty. The development of anesthesia in the mid-19th century also contributed to changing attitudes about horizontal positioning. As surgeons became comfortable with patients lying flat during operations, it became increasingly difficult to argue that the same position was dangerous during sleep. Medical schools began teaching new curricula that emphasized evidence-based medicine over traditional authority. This educational reform ensured that future physicians would be trained to evaluate medical practices based on scientific evidence rather than historical precedent. As European exploration and colonization expanded during the 16th through 19th centuries, Europeans encountered numerous cultures that had never adopted upright sleeping practices. These encounters provided compelling evidence that horizontal sleep was not only safe, but potentially superior to European traditions. Native American populations, observed by European explorers, slept horizontally on the ground or on simple platforms without apparent ill effects. Many of these populations appeared to be healthier and more vigorous than their European counterparts, challenging assumptions about the necessity of upright sleep. Asian cultures, particularly in China and Japan, had developed sophisticated horizontal sleeping arrangements that prioritized comfort and natural body positioning. European merchants and diplomats who experienced these sleeping arrangements often reported improved rest and better health. African cultures encountered by European traders and explorers also demonstrated effective horizontal sleeping practices. These observations contributed to growing European awareness that their traditional sleeping practices might be culturally specific rather than universally necessary. The expansion of global trade networks facilitated the exchange of sleeping-related technologies and practices. European merchants imported comfortable bedding materials, sleeping surfaces, and furniture designs from cultures that had never experienced the upright sleeping tradition. Missionary activities also played a role in spreading horizontal sleep practices. As European missionaries established settlements in non-European regions, they often adopted local sleeping customs for practical reasons, then reported back to Europe about their positive experiences. Despite the overwhelming evidence in favor of horizontal sleep, some segments of European society clung to upright sleeping practices well into the 19th century. These traditionalists created increasingly elaborate justifications for maintaining medieval sleeping customs. Conservative religious communities, particularly in rural areas, continued to view horizontal sleep as morally suspect. Some Protestant sects and Catholic religious orders maintained upright sleeping requirements as part of their spiritual discipline, arguing that comfortable sleep was incompatible with religious devotion. Certain aristocratic families, invested in their elaborate, upright sleeping traditions and furniture, maintained these practices as symbols of their ancient heritage and social status. These families often hired specialists to maintain their traditional sleeping arrangements and teach proper upright sleeping techniques to their children. Some medical practitioners, unwilling to admit that their professional training had been based on false premises, continued to prescribe upright sleeping for various conditions. These holdout physicians developed increasingly complex theories to explain why their patients still needed to sleep sitting up. Military organizations were among the last institutions to abandon upright sleeping practices. Some army units maintained upright sleeping requirements as part of their training regimens, arguing that soldiers needed to be ready for immediate action even while sleeping. The furniture industry also had economic incentives to maintain demand for upright sleeping equipment. Manufacturers of traditional sleeping furniture, fought against the transition to horizontal sleep by emphasizing the craftsmanship and status associated with their products. The Victorian era of the 19th century marked the final triumph of horizontal sleep culture in Europe and North America. The Victorian emphasis on domestic comfort, scientific progress, and individual well-being created the perfect conditions for the complete abandonment of upright sleeping practices. Victorian bedroom design prioritized comfort and privacy above all other considerations. The development of the modern bedroom as a private, comfortable space designed specifically for rest represented the culmination of centuries of gradual change in sleeping practices. The Victorian bed became a symbol of domestic prosperity and comfort. Elaborate bed frames, comfortable mattresses, and luxurious bedding demonstrated family success and commitment to health and well-being. Victorian medical theory fully embraced horizontal sleep as the natural and healthy position for human rest. Physicians began prescribing bed rest as a treatment for various conditions, completely reversing medieval medical attitudes toward lying down. The development of department stores and mail-order catalogs made comfortable bedding and furniture available to growing middle-class populations. This democratization of sleep comfort ensured that horizontal sleep practices spread throughout society rather than remaining limited to wealthy elites. Victorian culture also romanticized sleep and bedrooms in ways that would have been impossible under medieval upright sleeping traditions. The bedroom became associated with intimacy, comfort, and personal refuge from the stresses of industrial society. Remarkably, some aspects of medieval sleep culture persist in modern sleeping practices, though most people are unaware of their historical origins. Understanding these connections helps explain some of the seemingly irrational aspects of contemporary sleep behavior. The modern preference for firm mattresses and supportive pillows reflects ancient concerns about proper body positioning during sleep. While we no longer fear humor imbalance, we still worry about spinal alignment and postural support during rest. Contemporary anxiety about sleep positions and their health effects echoes medieval concerns about the dangers of sleeping improperly. Modern sleep medicine recognizes that certain positions can affect breathing, circulation, and comfort, validating some medieval intuitions while rejecting their supernatural explanations. The persistence of elaborate bedtime routines and sleep rituals in modern culture reflects the medieval understanding that proper sleep requires careful preparation and attention to detail. While our routines focus on hygiene and relaxation rather than humor balance, the underlying principle remains the same. Modern concerns about sleep environment, temperature, lighting, noise, and air quality parallel medieval attention to the conditions surrounding sleep. Though our understanding of these factors has improved dramatically, the basic recognition that sleep environment affects rest quality has remained constant. The contemporary emphasis on sleep as a marker of health and well-being reflects the medieval understanding that sleep practices have broad implications for overall health and social functioning. Modern sleep medicine has validated many medieval intuitions while providing better explanations for the underlying mechanisms. The surprising vindication: what medieval people got right. While medieval sleep practices were generally misguided, recent research has revealed that some medieval concerns about sleep position and environment were actually scientifically valid, though for different reasons than they understood. Modern sleep medicine has confirmed that sleeping position does affect breathing and circulation, particularly for people with certain medical conditions. While medieval theories about humor balance were wrong, their intuition that position matters for health was partially correct. The medieval emphasis on sleep timing and meal spacing before bed aligns with modern understanding of circadian rhythms and digestion. Contemporary sleep hygiene recommendations include many practices that medieval people followed for different reasons. Medieval attention to sleep environment and air quality was actually quite sophisticated. Their concerns about stuffy rooms and poor ventilation were medically valid, even though their explanations involving miasma and bad air were scientifically incorrect. The medieval understanding that sleep affects mental state and cognitive function was remarkably accurate. Modern neuroscience has confirmed that sleep quality has profound effects on mood, memory, and mental performance. Medieval recognition that sleep practices reflect social status and cultural values remains relevant today. Contemporary sleep culture still involves status symbols, expensive equipment, and social expectations about proper rest practices. The 1,000-year journey from upright to horizontal sleep represents one of the most dramatic transformations in human daily life. This change required overcoming deeply entrenched medical theories, religious doctrines, social customs, and economic interests that had supported upright sleeping for generations. The story of medieval sleep practices reminds us that many things we consider natural and obvious are actually cultural constructions that can change dramatically over time. The idea that humans naturally sleep lying down seems self-evident to us, but it was revolutionary to people who had been taught that horizontal sleep was dangerous and immoral. The transition to horizontal sleep also demonstrates the power of practical experience to overcome theoretical authority. Despite centuries of medical and religious teaching about the dangers of lying down, people eventually recognized that horizontal sleep simply felt better and produced better results. The democratization of comfortable sleep represents a significant improvement in human quality of life. The fact that comfortable, private, horizontal sleep is now available to most people in developed societies represents a genuine advance in human welfare that would have been unimaginable to medieval people. The story also illustrates the importance of questioning traditional practices and remaining open to new ideas. The people who first experimented with horizontal sleep were taking real social and professional risks, but their courage eventually benefited all of humanity. As you settle into your comfortable horizontal bed tonight, take a moment to appreciate the long journey that brought us to this point. The simple act of lying down to sleep represents centuries of gradual progress against superstition, tradition, and institutional authority. And perhaps most importantly, remember that our current sleep practices are also culturally constructed and subject to change. Future generations may look back at our sleep habits, our emphasis on individual beds, our 8-hour sleep schedules, our bedroom design, with the same mixture of fascination and bewilderment that we feel when contemplating medieval upright sleep. The long journey from sitting up to lying down reminds us that human comfort and well-being are not accidents of nature but achievements of culture, science, and individual courage. Every time you stretch out horizontally for a good night's rest, you're participating in one of humanity's greatest victories over unnecessary suffering. Sleep well, and sleep horizontally. You've earned it.
Now, if you've been enjoying our late-night historical deep dives, go ahead and hit that like button. Your support keeps these midnight history sessions going. So we've just explored why people slept sitting up in the Middle Ages, but now we're trading upright wooden chairs for, well, something arguably even more uncomfortable. We're sailing north to the land of longhouses and communal sleeping disasters. Tonight we're diving into the weird, wonderful, and often disturbing sleep habits of the Vikings. Because while you might think these seafaring warriors simply collapsed into bed after a long day of pillaging and exploring, the reality is far more fascinating and infinitely more bizarre. From communal sleeping arrangements that would make modern privacy advocates weep, to bedtime rituals involving everything from runes to ritualistic snoring competitions, to the absolutely wild concept of night shifts in a culture that barely distinguished between day and night during certain seasons, we're about to discover that Vikings didn't just conquer lands and seas, they also had some of the most peculiar approaches to sleep in human history. And trust me, by the end of this, you'll never look at your own bedtime routine the same way again. So adjust your pillows, maybe grab a warm drink, and let's sail into the surprisingly restless nights of the Viking Age. Because getting a good night's sleep was apparently just as complicated 1,000 years ago as it is today, just with more axes nearby and significantly more communal body heat. Tonight we're diving into the weird, wonderful, and often disturbing sleep habits of the Vikings. Because while you might think these seafaring warriors simply collapsed into bed after a long day of pillaging and exploring, the reality is far more fascinating and infinitely more bizarre. From communal sleeping arrangements that would make modern privacy advocates weep, to bedtime rituals involving everything from runes to ritualistic snoring competitions, to the absolutely wild concept of night shifts in a culture that barely distinguished between day and night during certain seasons, we're about to discover that Vikings didn't just conquer lands and seas, they also had some of the most peculiar approaches to sleep in human history.
and trust me, by the end of this, you'll never look at your own bedtime routine the same way again. So adjust your pillows, maybe grab a warm drink, and let's sail into the surprisingly restless nights of the Viking Age. Because getting a good night's sleep was apparently just as complicated 1,000 years ago as it is today, just with more axes nearby and significantly more communal body heat. Picture this: you're a Viking warrior. You've just spent 14 hours rowing through choppy North Sea waters. Your beard is frozen, your muscles ache, and all you want is to collapse somewhere warm and quiet. Too bad. You're about to enter the medieval equivalent of a youth hostel designed by someone who actively hated personal space. Welcome to the Viking Longhouse, where the concept of your own room was about as foreign as indoor plumbing or basic dental care. These weren't cozy family homes. They were communal sleeping nightmares that housed anywhere from 20 to 60 people, all sharing one massive hall that was part bedroom, part dining room, part workshop, and part livestock stable. Yes, you heard that right. The cows slept with you. Not by choice, mind you, but because keeping your cattle warm and alive through Scandinavian winters was slightly more important than your comfort. Nothing says good night's sleep like the gentle lowing of cattle and the occasional kick from a restless goat. The longhouse was essentially one enormous room, typically 60 to 100 feet long and about 20 feet wide, with a central hearth running down the middle. The fire provided warmth, light, and the constant threat of accidental immolation. Sleep too close, and you'd wake up crispy. Sleep too far away, and you'd wake up as a Viking popsicle. But here's where it gets really interesting. The sleeping arrangements weren't random. Oh no, Vikings had a complex social hierarchy that extended right into their bedtime routines. The closer you slept to the fire, the higher your social status. The Jarl or chieftain got the prime real estate right next to the hearth. His family clustered around him like heat-seeking missiles. The thralls, or slaves, were relegated to the outer edges where the cold crept in through the walls like an unwelcome house guest. And let's talk about those walls. They weren't insulated. They were basically wooden planks held together with hope and whatever mud they could find. The wind howled through gaps that would make modern energy efficiency experts weep. Rain leaked through the roof. Snow drifted in during storms. You weren't just sleeping in a communal space. You were sleeping in a communal space that was actively trying to kill you with hypothermia. The sleeping platforms, called benches, ran along the walls. These weren't comfortable mattresses. They were wooden platforms covered with whatever furs, blankets, or straw you could manage to acquire. If you were lucky, you had a bearskin. If you were unlucky, you had some moldy hay and a threadbare woolen blanket that provided about as much warmth as a sneeze. Privacy was a luxury that simply didn't exist. When you settled down for the night, you were maybe 2 feet away from the person next to you. Their breathing, their snoring, their nighttime movements, their digestive issues, all of it became part of your sleep soundtrack. Medieval white noise, if you will, except instead of ocean waves, it was a symphony of bodily functions and restless shuffling. But the real kicker, the longhouse never really went quiet. Vikings didn't have a strict lights-out policy. The fire needed constant tending, which meant someone was always awake, poking at logs, adding fuel, or stirring the embers. Guards took shifts. Mothers nursed babies. Someone was always having a late-night conversation, telling stories, or arguing about tomorrow's plans. And then there were the animals. The livestock that shared your sleeping space weren't just decoration. They were active participants in your nighttime experience. Cows don't follow human sleep schedules. They chew. They shift. They occasionally decide that 3 a.m. is the perfect time to have a bovine conversation with their neighbor. Pigs grunt. Chickens cluck. Goats bleat. The longhouse was essentially a medieval petting zoo, where you were trying to sleep in the middle of the exhibit. The smell was another adventure entirely. Imagine 60 unwashed humans, plus livestock, plus a constantly burning fire, plus whatever food scraps were scattered around, plus the occasional wet dog, all marinating together in a poorly ventilated space. Medieval air fresheners consisted of burning herbs if you were lucky, or just accepting that everything smelled like a combination of smoke, sweat and barnyard. Personal belongings were stored in chests under the sleeping benches, which meant that if you wanted to get something from your storage in the middle of the night, you had to climb over sleeping people and rummage around in the dark. This led to a lot of midnight cursing, accidental kicks, and the occasional bout of confused violence when someone mistook a middle-of-the-night storage retrieval for a raid. But perhaps the most challenging aspect of longhouse sleeping was the complete lack of schedule coordination. Different people had different sleep needs. Warriors who'd been on long voyages might crash early and sleep like the dead. Craftsmen who'd been working all day might stay up late finishing projects. Children had their own chaotic sleep patterns. The elderly might wake up multiple times during the night. Women tending to infants had no schedule at all. This created a constant cycle of people going to bed and getting up at all hours. Just as you were drifting off to sleep, someone would be getting up to tend the fire. Just as you were entering deep sleep, a group of late-night arrivals would stumble in, stepping over sleeping bodies and engaging in loud whispered conversations about where they could find space to lie down. The social dynamics were equally complex. Snoring was a major issue, but you couldn't just tell the Jarl to roll over. Status determined not just where you slept, but how much noise you were allowed to make. Important people could snore, talk in their sleep, or toss and turn without consequence. Lower status individuals were expected to sleep quietly and disturb no one. And what happened if you were sick? Too bad. There was no isolation room, no quarantine protocol. If you had a fever, a cough, or something more serious, you were still sleeping in the communal space, sharing your illness with everyone around you. Medieval healthcare was basically hope for the best and try not to die loudly. The bathroom situation was equally grim. There were no indoor facilities, which meant late-night trips outside to the designated waste areas. In the middle of a Scandinavian winter, this wasn't just inconvenient, but potentially life-threatening. You had to fully wake up, find your outer clothes, navigate around sleeping people and animals, step outside into sub-zero temperatures, do your business, and then come back inside to a fire that might have died down while you were gone. Some people solved this problem with chamber pots kept under their sleeping benches, but that created its own issues. Nothing ruins a good night's sleep like accidentally kicking over someone's midnight bathroom solution. The truly remarkable thing about all of this was that Vikings somehow managed to function as a society. They built ships, conducted trade, raised families, and conquered territories, all while operating on what must have been chronically disrupted sleep schedules. They were essentially running a medieval civilization on the sleep equivalent of a never-ending slumber party in a barn. But they adapted. They developed coping strategies. They learned to sleep through noise that would drive modern people to madness. They created social protocols for navigating shared sleeping spaces. They figured out how to maintain some semblance of privacy in a completely public environment. And strangely enough, this communal sleeping arrangement served social purposes that modern individualistic sleeping can't replicate. It reinforced social bonds. It created a sense of shared experience and mutual dependence. It made the longhouse feel like a true community rather than just a collection of individuals who happened to share a roof. The longhouse sleeping experience was also a form of social education. Children learned their place in the hierarchy by where they slept. They absorbed cultural values through the stories told around the fire. They developed resilience by learning to sleep through chaos. They learned to navigate complex social dynamics in close quarters. But let's be honest, it was also probably exhausting. The constant noise, the lack of privacy, the physical discomfort, the temperature fluctuations, the smells, the social pressure to sleep appropriately for your status. It all added up to a nighttime experience that was more endurance test than restful sleep. And we haven't even talked about the seasonal variations yet. During the brief Scandinavian summer, when daylight lasted nearly 24 hours, the longhouse never really got dark. The fire still burned for warmth and cooking, but there was also natural light streaming through whatever openings existed in the walls and roof. Sleep became a matter of when you felt tired rather than when darkness fell. During the long winter months, when daylight was a precious commodity lasting only a few hours, the longhouse became a cave-like environment where people's sleep schedules could become completely divorced from natural rhythms. Some people might sleep during the day and stay awake at night. Others might sleep in short bursts throughout the 24-hour cycle. The longhouse was also a place where dreams and nightmares took on communal significance. Vikings believed deeply in the power of dreams, and a particularly vivid nightmare or prophetic dream experienced by an important person could wake up the entire longhouse as they thrashed around or cried out in their sleep. These dreams were often interpreted as omens or messages from the gods, turning someone's sleep disturbance into a matter of community concern. And let's not forget about the visitors. Viking society was built on hospitality, which meant that travelers, traders, and guests were constantly arriving and being welcomed into the longhouse. These visitors didn't just show up for dinner, they expected to be given sleeping space as well. So not only were you dealing with your regular sleeping companions, but you were also accommodating strangers who might have different sleep habits, different personal hygiene standards, and different ideas about nighttime etiquette. The guest sleeping arrangements followed their own complex protocols. Important visitors might be given space near the fire, displacing regular residents to less comfortable locations. Ordinary travelers might be assigned to the outer edges, or asked to share space with people of similar social status. But everyone was expected to make room, regardless of how crowded the longhouse already was. This constant flow of visitors meant that the longhouse sleeping environment was never stable. Just when you'd gotten used to sleeping next to Olaf the blacksmith, a group of traders would arrive and completely rearrange the sleeping arrangements. Your comfortable spot might suddenly become someone else's designated area, and you'd have to find a new place to bed down for the night. The communal nature of longhouse sleeping also meant that personal sleep problems became everyone's problems. If someone was experiencing nightmares, insomnia, or sleep talking, it affected the entire group. There was no way to isolate sleep disturbances, no way to give someone their own space to work through sleep issues privately. This led to the development of various folk remedies and communal coping strategies. Herbal preparations were shared among the group. Sleeping positions were adjusted based on trial and error. People learned to work around each other's sleep quirks, rather than solving them individually. But perhaps most remarkably, the longhouse sleeping system somehow worked well enough to sustain a culture that successfully expanded across Europe and beyond. Vikings managed to maintain the energy and mental clarity needed for complex navigation, sophisticated craftsmanship, and strategic warfare, all while operating on what must have been perpetually fragmented sleep. The longhouse wasn't just a place to sleep, it was a social institution that shaped every aspect of Viking life. It determined social relationships, reinforced cultural values, and created a form of intimacy that modern people would find either deeply comforting or utterly unbearable. And this was just the beginning of the Viking sleep story. Because the longhouse was only one part of their complex relationship with rest and sleep. When Vikings left their communal sleeping arrangements for raids, voyages, or seasonal activities, they encountered entirely new sets of sleep challenges that required even more creative solutions. The longhouse may have been chaotic, smelly, and uncomfortable, but it was also home. It was where Viking families, communities, and cultures were literally built, one restless night at a time. And understanding how they managed to sleep in these conditions gives us insight into just how adaptable and resilient human beings can be when survival depends on learning to rest in the most unlikely circumstances. But the longhouse was just the beginning. Viking sleep habits got even weirder when they left the relative comfort of their communal homes and ventured out into the wider world. And that's where our story gets truly interesting, because Vikings didn't just sleep strangely at home, they turned sleeping into an art form of creative problem solving that would make modern camping enthusiasts weep with envy. The Longhouse Lottery was just the first challenge in a lifetime of sleep adventures that would test the limits of human adaptability and resourcefulness. And if you thought sharing a room with 60 people and some livestock was challenging, just wait until you hear about Viking ship sleeping arrangements. Because when Vikings went to sea, they didn't just leave their comfortable beds behind. They left the entire concept of comfortable sleeping behind, and entered a world where getting any rest at all required ingenuity, cooperation, and an almost supernatural ability to sleep through conditions that would challenge even the most experienced insomniac. The longhouse may have been chaotic, but it was predictable chaos. The sea was another matter entirely.
If you thought the longhouse was challenging, welcome to Viking ship sleeping, where the phrase "rockabye baby" takes on a whole new meaning, and that meaning is prepare for the most nauseating night of your life. Viking longships were marvels of engineering, perfectly designed for speed, shallow water navigation, and striking fear into the hearts of coastal communities. What they were not designed for was comfortable sleeping. In fact, they seemed almost deliberately engineered to make rest as difficult as possible, as if the ship designers had a personal vendetta against anyone who dared to close their eyes while at sea. The typical Viking longship was about 70 feet long and 15 feet wide, designed to carry anywhere from 30 to 60 warriors plus their gear, weapons, food, and whatever loot they'd managed to acquire. Now, do some quick math here. That's roughly 1,000 square feet of space for 60 people, which gives each person about 16 square feet of personal area. For perspective, a standard prison cell is about 60 square feet. Vikings were essentially sleeping in conditions that would make modern prisoners file human rights complaints. But here's the kicker, that 16 square feet wasn't just for sleeping, it was for everything. Your weapons, your personal belongings, your share of the food supplies, your rowing position, your eating space, and yes, finally, your sleeping area. It was like trying to live in a gym locker, except the gym locker was constantly moving, occasionally filling with water, and surrounded by armed men who hadn't bathed in weeks. The sleeping arrangements on a Viking ship were a masterclass in creative space utilization. During the day, the ship functioned as a rowing vessel, with warriors seated on sea chests that doubled as storage for their personal belongings. When night fell, these same sea chests became pillows, and the narrow space between the rowing benches became bedrooms. Picture this, you're lying on a wooden deck that's maybe 18 inches wide, wedged between two other warriors who are also trying to sleep in the same impossible space. Your feet are probably touching someone else's head. Your shoulder is pressed against the ship's hull, which is constantly creaking and groaning as the vessel moves through the water. Above you, there's no roof, just the open sky and whatever weather happens to be passing through. The ship never stopped moving. Even when anchored, it bobbed and swayed with the waves. Even in calm seas, there was constant motion that made sleep feel like trying to rest on a very large, very uncomfortable rocking chair that someone was shaking maliciously. In rough seas, sleep became a survival skill, as you had to somehow remain unconscious while your body was being thrown around like a rag doll. And let's talk about the weather. Viking ships had no cabins, no below-deck sleeping quarters, no shelter whatsoever. If it rained, you got wet. If it was cold, you froze. If it was hot, you baked. If there was a storm, you held on for dear life and hoped you'd still be on the ship when morning came. Weather wasn't just an inconvenience. It was a constant threat to your ability to get any rest at all. The Vikings developed some ingenious solutions to these challenges. They created sleeping bags, made from seal skin or sheepskin that were designed to be waterproof and warm. These weren't the comfortable sleeping bags modern campers use mice. They were essentially leather sacks that you crawled into, hoping they would keep you alive until morning. They were warm, but they were also cramped, smelly, and made sleeping positions even more limited than they already were. Some Vikings rigged up small tents or shelters using their shields and cloaks, creating tiny personal spaces that provided minimal protection from the elements. But these shelters were so small that you basically had to sleep in the fetal position, and they offered no protection from the motion of the ship or the noise of your shipmates. The noise on a Viking ship was constant and varied. The creaking of the wooden hull, the splash of waves against the sides, the snoring of exhausted warriors, the occasional shout from whoever was on watch, the sound of ropes and rigging moving in the wind. It all combined to create a symphony of sleep disruption that would challenge even the most dedicated insomniac. But the real challenge wasn't just the physical discomfort, it was the psychological pressure.
These weren't pleasure cruises. Viking voyages were dangerous, often lasting weeks or months, with the constant threat of storms, enemy attacks, or simply getting lost at sea. Sleep became a luxury that you couldn't always afford. Someone always had to be awake, keeping watch, maintaining the ship, or navigating by the stars. This led to the development of sleep shifts that were far more complex than anything we see in modern maritime operations. Vikings couldn't just divide into day and night shifts. They had to account for weather changes, navigation requirements, potential threats, and the physical limitations of men who were operating under extreme stress and exhaustion. The watch system typically divided the crew into 3 groups, with each group responsible for 4-hour shifts. But these weren't leisurely shifts where you could relax between duties. The off-duty warriors had to be ready to spring into action at a moment's notice. Sleep became a form of combat readiness. You had to be able to wake up instantly, grab your weapons, and be ready to fight or row, or respond to an emergency. This constant state of alertness meant that Vikings never really experienced deep, restful sleep while at sea. They developed the ability to sleep lightly, to rest while remaining partially conscious, to wake up at the slightest unusual sound or movement. It was a survival skill that served them well in combat situations, but probably left them chronically sleep-deprived. The food situation on ships also affected sleep patterns. Viking sea rations were designed for nutrition and preservation, not for digestive comfort. Dried fish, hardtack, and preserved meat were staples that often caused stomach discomfort, especially when combined with the constant motion of the ship. Many Vikings probably spent their nights dealing with seasickness, indigestion, and the general misery of trying to digest challenging food while being constantly rocked back and forth. Bathroom facilities on Viking ships were essentially non-existent. The head was literally the front of the ship, where you would hang over the side, and hope the waves didn't wash you overboard. This meant that nighttime bathroom breaks were not only uncomfortable but genuinely dangerous. In rough seas or bad weather, relieving yourself could become a life-threatening adventure. The social dynamics of ship sleeping were different from longhouse sleeping but equally complex. In the longhouse, social hierarchy determined sleeping positions, but on a ship, practical considerations often took precedence. The most experienced sailors might need to sleep in positions where they could quickly respond to navigation emergencies. The strongest warriors might need to be positioned where they could quickly defend the ship. The sick or injured might need to be placed where they could be easily monitored and cared for. This created a constantly shifting sleep arrangement that depended on the day's activities, the weather conditions, the health of the crew, and the perceived threats. You might sleep in a different position every night, next to different people, with different responsibilities and different comfort levels. The psychological impact of sleeping in such close quarters with the same group of men for weeks or months was significant. Personal hygiene became a communal concern. Snoring became a matter of group tolerance. Sleep talking could reveal secrets or fears that might be better kept private. The lack of privacy meant that everyone knew everyone else's sleep habits, dreams, and nighttime vulnerabilities. But perhaps most remarkably, Vikings somehow managed to navigate across vast oceans, conduct complex raids, and maintain their fighting effectiveness, while operating on what must have been severely disrupted sleep schedules. They were essentially running maritime military operations, while chronically sleep-deprived, which speaks to their incredible physical and mental toughness. Now let's talk about something that would drive modern sleep specialists to drink: Viking seasonal sleep patterns. If you thought sharing a bed with livestock was challenging, try maintaining a normal sleep schedule when the sun either never sets or barely rises for months at a time. Vikings lived in latitudes where the natural light cycles were so extreme that they basically broke the human circadian rhythm and stomped on the pieces. During summer months in Norway, Sweden, and Iceland, the sun might set for only a few hours, creating a perpetual twilight that made it nearly impossible to distinguish between day and night. During winter months, the sun might rise for only a few hours, creating a prolonged darkness that felt like living inside a cave. This wasn't just a minor inconvenience. It was a fundamental challenge to human biology. Our bodies are designed to sleep when it's dark and wake when it's light, When those cues disappear, or become completely scrambled, sleep becomes a negotiation between your exhaustion level and your body's confused attempts to figure out what time it is. During the long summer days, Vikings faced the challenge of sleeping in broad daylight. The longhouse might have small windows or openings, but they weren't designed to block out light. The central fire still burned for cooking and warmth, even during the bright summer nights. The result was a living space that was constantly illuminated, making it nearly impossible to create the dark, quiet conditions that promote deep sleep. Vikings developed various strategies for dealing with this. They used heavy furs and cloaks to create personal darkness, essentially wrapping themselves in makeshift blackout curtains. They learned to sleep during the cooler parts of the day, when their bodies naturally wanted to rest regardless of the light conditions. They developed a more flexible relationship with sleep, napping when they felt tired rather than adhering to a strict nighttime schedule. But this created its own problems. Without a consistent sleep schedule, the longhouse became a place where people were constantly getting up, lying down, and shifting between sleep and wakefulness. The communal nature of the sleeping arrangements meant that one person's inability to sleep in daylight became everyone's problem. The winter months presented the opposite challenge. During the long Arctic nights, Vikings lived in almost constant darkness, with only the fire providing light and warmth. This prolonged darkness could trigger seasonal depression, vitamin D deficiency, and a general sense of lethargy that made it difficult to maintain normal activity levels. But strangely, some Vikings thrived during these dark months. The constant darkness created a cozy, intimate atmosphere in the longhouse that encouraged storytelling, craftsmanship, and social bonding. Without the distractions of outdoor work and travel, winter became a time for cultural activities that were difficult to maintain during the busy summer months. The seasonal variations also affected Viking work patterns, which in turn affected their sleep schedules. During summer, when daylight lasted nearly 24 hours, Vikings could work, travel, and conduct raids at any time of day or night. This created a culture where sleep became secondary to opportunity. If the weather was good for sailing, if an enemy was vulnerable, if there was work to be done, Vikings would stay awake and active regardless of what time their bodies thought it should be. During winter, when outdoor activities were limited by weather and darkness, Vikings developed a more relaxed approach to sleep. They might sleep longer, nap more frequently, or develop more flexible sleep schedules that allowed them to take advantage of the few hours of daylight for essential activities. This seasonal flexibility extended to their social activities as well. Summer was the time for raids, voyages, and outdoor festivals that might last for days with minimal sleep. Winter was the time for indoor gatherings, storytelling sessions, and craft work that could be done in the firelight, while others slept. The result was a culture that had a fundamentally different relationship with sleep than most other societies. Vikings didn't see sleep as a fixed scheduled activity. They saw it as a flexible resource that could be adjusted based on circumstances, opportunities, and seasonal conditions.
Vikings didn't just sleep, they brought their entire spiritual and cultural worldview into their bedtime routines, creating a complex system of rituals, superstitions, and beliefs that would make modern sleep hygiene experts question their life choices. Dreams, for Vikings, weren't just random brain activity during sleep. They were messages from the gods, glimpses of the future, or visits from the spirits of the dead. This meant that sleep wasn't just rest. It was a form of spiritual communication that required preparation, interpretation, and sometimes immediate action. Before going to sleep, Vikings might perform rituals designed to encourage prophetic dreams or protect themselves from nightmares. These could include burning specific herbs, reciting prayers to particular gods, or placing protective amulets under their sleeping furs. The goal wasn't just to sleep well, it was to sleep safely and productively. The interpretation of dreams was a serious business in Viking culture. A particularly vivid or disturbing dream might wake up the entire longhouse,
as the dreamer sought interpretation from the older, wiser members of the community. Dreams of battles might be seen as omens of future conflicts. Dreams of the dead might be interpreted as messages from ancestors or warnings about impending dangers. This belief in the spiritual significance of dreams created a culture where sleep disturbances were taken seriously. If someone was having recurring nightmares, it wasn't just a personal problem, it was a potential sign of spiritual imbalance or supernatural threat that needed to be addressed by the community. Vikings also believed in the concept of dream travel, where the soul could leave the body during sleep and visit other places or realms. This made sleep a potentially dangerous activity, as a soul that wandered too far might have difficulty returning to its body. Various protective rituals were developed to ensure safe dream travel and successful return to waking consciousness. The belief in dream travel also meant that sleep positions and locations were carefully considered. Sleeping in certain positions might encourage or discourage dream travel. Sleeping in certain locations might make dream travel more dangerous or more productive. These beliefs added another layer of complexity to the already challenging logistics of communal sleeping arrangements. Snoring was not just a social annoyance, it was often interpreted as a sign of spiritual strength or weakness. Loud, regular snoring might be seen as a sign of a strong soul that was actively communicating with the spirit world. Irregular or disturbing snoring might be interpreted as evidence of spiritual attack or internal conflict. This meant that snoring partners weren't just tolerated, they were often monitored for spiritual significance. Changes in snoring patterns might be interpreted as omens or warnings. The community might take collective action to address snoring that was seen as spiritually problematic. Vikings also had complex beliefs about sleeping in different locations. Sleeping outdoors was believed to increase the likelihood of contact with nature spirits or gods. Sleeping near water was thought to encourage prophetic dreams. Sleeping in certain types of shelter might provide protection from malevolent spirits or enhance communication with beneficial ones. These beliefs influenced everything from ship sleeping arrangements to the choice of camping locations during raids. Vikings weren't just looking for practical shelter, they were seeking sleeping locations that would provide spiritual advantages or protection. The seasonal variations in daylight also had spiritual implications. The long summer days were seen as a time when the barrier between the physical and spiritual worlds was thinner, making dreams more powerful and potentially more dangerous. The long winter nights were seen as a time when the ancestors were more active, making sleep a form of communion with the dead. This seasonal spiritual calendar influenced sleep rituals and practices throughout the year. Different herbs might be burned during different seasons. Different protective amulets might be used based on the spiritual threats or opportunities associated with particular times of year. The belief in the spiritual significance of sleep also extended to the treatment of sleep disorders. Insomnia wasn't just a medical problem, it was often interpreted as evidence of spiritual imbalance or supernatural interference. The treatment might involve not just herbal remedies, but also spiritual cleansing rituals, offerings to particular gods, or changes in lifestyle designed to restore spiritual harmony. Vikings, who were known for their ability to sleep well or to have prophetic dreams, were often sought out for advice and interpretation. Sleep became a form of spiritual skill that could enhance an individual's status within the community. Chapter 5. The practical innovations. How Vikings actually made it work. Despite all the challenges, Vikings developed some remarkably practical innovations that allowed them to get at least some sleep under these impossible conditions. These weren't just survival strategies, they were clever adaptations that demonstrated human ingenuity in the face of seemingly insurmountable obstacles. The Viking sleeping bag, made from seal skin or sheepskin, was far ahead of its time. These bags were designed to be waterproof, warm and compact, providing a personal sleeping environment that could be used in the longhouse, on ships, or during outdoor expeditions. They were essentially portable bedrooms that could be set up anywhere. The construction of these sleeping bags was sophisticated. The skins were treated with natural oils to make them waterproof while maintaining flexibility. The interior was often lined with softer furs or fabrics to provide comfort. The design included drawstrings or ties that could seal the bag against cold air while allowing for ventilation to prevent condensation. Vikings also developed innovative pillow solutions. Since carrying soft pillows wasn't practical, they learned to use their personal belongings as pillows. Sea chests, bundled clothing, and even weapons could be arranged to provide head and neck support. The key was learning to make these improvised pillows comfortable enough to allow sleep while keeping essential items secure and accessible. The use of body heat was another crucial innovation. Vikings became experts at sharing warmth without sacrificing personal space or comfort. They learned to arrange sleeping positions to maximize heat retention, to share sleeping bags when necessary, and to use the heat generated by the central fire most effectively. This wasn't just about survival, it was about creating a sleeping system that could work under the most challenging conditions. Vikings developed techniques for sleeping in shifts that allowed maximum rest for each individual while maintaining the security and functionality of the group. The arrangement of the longhouse sleeping areas was also more sophisticated than it might appear. The positioning of sleeping platforms, the management of the central fire, and the organization of personal storage were all designed to maximize comfort and minimize disturbance. Vikings learned to create microenvironments within the communal space that provided some degree of personal comfort and privacy. Vikings also developed techniques for managing the social dynamics of communal sleeping. They created informal rules about noise levels, movement, and personal space that allowed large groups to coexist in intimate sleeping arrangements. These social innovations were as important as the physical adaptations in making the system work. The seasonal adaptations were equally impressive. Vikings learned to adjust their sleeping practices based on changing light conditions, weather patterns, and activity levels. They developed different strategies for summer and winter sleeping, for indoor and outdoor rest, for ship and land-based sleeping arrangements. So what can we learn from the Vikings' bizarre, uncomfortable, and seemingly impossible approach to sleep? Quite a lot, actually. Their experience demonstrates that human beings are remarkably adaptable when it comes to rest and sleep, and that many of our modern assumptions about proper sleep might be more cultural than biological. Vikings showed us that sleep doesn't have to be private, quiet, or comfortable to be functional. They proved that humans can adapt to extreme seasonal variations in light and darkness. They demonstrated that communal sleeping arrangements can actually strengthen social bonds rather than destroy them. Their experience also shows us that the meaning we attach to sleep, whether it's seen as a private refuge, a spiritual activity, or a communal experience, shapes how we approach rest and what we get from it. Vikings saw sleep as a social and spiritual activity, and their sleeping practices reflected those values. The Viking approach to sleep was challenging, uncomfortable, and often downright miserable by modern standards. But it was also practical, adaptive, and remarkably successful in supporting a culture that thrived under some of the harshest conditions on Earth. Vikings didn't just survive their sleeping arrangements, they used them as the foundation for a society that successfully expanded across Europe, established trade networks that spanned continents, and created a cultural legacy that continues to fascinate us today. Their sleep habits were weird, wonderful, and utterly impractical by modern standards. But they worked. And in a world where many people struggle with sleep despite having access to comfortable beds, private rooms, and perfect climate control, there's something to be said for the Viking approach to rest. They understood that sleep is not just about individual comfort, it's about community, adaptation, and making the best of whatever circumstances you find yourself in. They knew that perfect sleep conditions are a luxury, not a necessity, and that humans are capable of resting and recovering under conditions that would challenge even the most adventurous modern sleeper. The next time you're complaining about your mattress being too firm, or your neighbor being too loud, remember the Vikings. They shared their beds with livestock, slept on wooden planks, in constantly moving ships, and somehow managed to function as one of the most successful cultures in human history. Their sleep habits were absolutely bizarre, but they were also a testament to human adaptability, ingenuity, and the remarkable ability to find rest wherever and whenever it's needed. The Vikings may have slept strangely, but they slept successfully, and that's perhaps the most important lesson of all. Sweet dreams, and may your sleep be warmer, drier, and significantly less communal than a Viking's. And remember, the next time you can't sleep, you could always try the Viking approach. Just gather 60 friends, some livestock, and a really uncomfortable wooden platform. Sleep troubles solved, medieval style. Until next time, this has been another Sleepover with History. Sleep well, and remember, no matter how bad your night is, at least you're not trying to sleep next to a Viking who's been rowing all day and hasn't bathed in a month. History puts everything in perspective, doesn't it?